The German officers stopped in the middle of the road when they saw Black American soldiers waiting beside the work trucks, and one colonel threw his shovel into the dirt as if the whole camp had been insulted. But before the guards could force the line forward, a wounded prisoner stepped out from behind the warehouse carrying a hidden note that proved the refusal had been planned before sunrise, and Patton's jeep was already coming through the gate. The work detail was supposed to leave the camp at 7 in the morning, with 50 German officers assigned to clear debris from a damaged rail siding under American supervision. The trucks were ready, the tools had been counted, and the prisoners had been lined by rank because the camp commander wanted the transfer finished before Patton's inspection. At the loading road, a platoon of Black American soldiers from a service unit stood beside the trucks, assigned to escort the detail, secure the tools, and protect the work site from looters moving through the ruins. They had already checked the fuel, marked the prisoner numbers, and set water cans beside the rear wheels. The first German officer saw them and stopped. Then the men behind him stopped too. A colonel with a gray face and polished boots stepped out of line, looked at the black sergeant in charge, and dropped his shovel onto the road loud enough for every prisoner to hear. The camp commander moved quickly toward the line and ordered the German officers to pick up their tools. The colonel refused without raising his voice. He said officers of the German army would not take orders, tools, or transport from black soldiers. The black sergeant did not answer the insult. He kept his hands on the clipboard and continued reading the truck assignments. But the refusal spread down the line as more German officers placed their shovels on the ground. The road filled with tools, boots, and angry silence. An American lieutenant ordered the prisoners back into formation, but the German colonel raised his hand and gave one sharp command in German. The officers stepped together, blocking the loading road and trapping the work trucks behind them. The refusal had become organized before the Americans could react. A wounded German prisoner near the warehouse suddenly moved from the medical bench and limped toward the road. He carried a folded note in one hand, but another German officer grabbed his sleeve before he reached the lieutenant. The wounded man twisted free, fell hard on one knee, and threw the note under the nearest truck. The black sergeant saw the paper slide beneath the tire. He bent, picked it up, and handed it to the lieutenant without a word. The note listed the names of German officers who would refuse the detail, the exact hour of the protest, and the phrase they were supposed to repeat when the black soldiers arrived. The camp commander tried to take the note, claiming it was only prisoner nonsense. The lieutenant held it back and ordered the wounded man protected. The German colonel pointed at the wounded prisoner and called him a disgrace, which made several ordinary German POWs near the fence step away from the officers. Patton's jeep entered the gate while the tools still lay in the dirt. He saw the blocked road, the waiting trucks, the black soldiers standing under insult without breaking discipline, and the German officers refusing to move. He stepped out before the jeep fully stopped and ordered the camp commander to explain why the entire detail was frozen. The commander said there had been a misunderstanding over work assignments. The black sergeant handed Patton the note before anyone could soften the story. Patton read it once, looked at the German colonel, then looked at the shovels on the ground, and ordered every man to remain exactly where he stood. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. Patton had the note placed on the hood of his jeep and ordered an interpreter to read it aloud in English and German. The words turned the refusal into evidence. It had not been a sudden insult. It had been planned to humiliate the black soldiers publicly and test whether the camp command would surrender authority to captured officers. The German colonel tried to interrupt, saying his rank gave him the right to object to improper treatment. Patton ordered him to stand beside the fallen shovels while the interpreter finished reading. The colonel's face tightened when his own name came first on the list. The black sergeant was ordered to continue the roll call as if the refusal had not happened. He read each German name clearly, and every officer named in the note was pulled aside by MPs. Some stepped out proudly, but others looked surprised that the Americans already knew who had agreed before sunrise. Patton ordered the barracks of the officer group searched immediately. MPs moved through the camp road with speed, entered the officers' quarters, and found a second paper hidden inside a shaving kit. It listed replacement leaders in case the colonel was removed. The escalation sharpened when the search team found a rough drawing of the loading road. The drawing showed where each German officer should stand to block the trucks, where the black soldiers would be positioned, and where a photographer from a nearby civilian town might see the confrontation through the fence. The camp commander claimed he knew nothing about any outside attention, but the gate log showed a civilian photographer had requested entry that same morning to document rail repairs. Patton ordered the man stopped before he reached the camp and had the guardhouse phone records brought to the yard. The phone records showed a call from the officers' barracks to a civilian office the previous evening. The German officers had not only planned a refusal, they had tried to turn American discipline into a public embarrassment by creating a scene around the black soldiers. A young black corporal stepped forward with a toolbox in his hands and reported that 2 truck brake lines had been loosened before the detail was called. He had found the damage during inspection and repaired one line before the refusal began. The second line was still hanging open beneath the rear truck. Patton ordered the trucks inspected in front of everyone. A mechanic slid under the vehicle and came out holding the loosened fitting. If the trucks had moved downhill with prisoners aboard, the failure could have caused a crash beyond the gate. The German colonel denied sabotage, but the wounded German prisoner from the warehouse pointed toward a captain in the officer line. MPs searched that captain's coat and found grease on his cuff and a small wrench wrapped in cloth. The confrontation spread from prejudice to danger. The refusal was no longer only about working with black soldiers. It had become a plan involving sabotage, staged humiliation, and possible injury to American guards and prisoners alike. Patton ordered the black sergeant to take command of the loading road and continue the inspection under protection. The German officers were forced to watch as the soldiers they had tried to shame uncovered the broken plan piece by piece. The major consequence came when the camp commander's office was searched and a sealed complaint draft was found already typed before the refusal happened. It claimed German officers had been mistreated by being placed under black American supervision and demanded that future details be guarded only by white troops. Patton had the draft carried into the yard and placed beside the note, the road sketch, and the wrench. The timeline was impossible to deny. The complaint had been prepared before any order was given, which meant the German officers expected the camp command to protect their refusal afterward. The commander tried to say the draft was never meant to be filed. Patton asked why it was sealed, addressed, and placed beneath outgoing mail. The mail clerk was brought forward and admitted he had been told to send it once the work detail broke down. The black sergeant remained beside the trucks, still holding the clipboard. Patton ordered him to read the names of the German officers who had obeyed orders and remained ready to work. Several regular officers stepped forward, and one older major said through the interpreter that the colonel had threatened to mark any German who worked under black soldiers as dishonored. That admission changed the prisoner crowd. Some Germans who had stayed quiet began pointing toward men who had pushed them into the protest. MPs separated witnesses from the colonel's group, while the lieutenant created 2 new lists, one for willing workers and one for organizers. A medic brought the wounded prisoner to the evidence table. His name was Weber, a former signals officer, and he explained that he had discovered the plan after hearing the colonel discuss the protest in the washroom. He had written the warning note and hidden it in his sleeve until he saw the black soldiers arrive. The colonel accused Weber of betraying his own men. Patton ordered the accusation recorded, then asked Weber what the officers planned after the refusal. Weber said the sabotage was meant to delay the detail long enough for the civilian photographer to capture the confrontation, making it appear that black soldiers had lost control of German officers. The major consequence reached the Americans when Patton relieved the camp commander from authority over prisoner labor pending investigation. The commander's failure had allowed the German officers to believe their racial insult would be treated as a diplomatic problem instead of a discipline problem. Patton then canceled all officer privileges for the refusing group. Their separate mess line, private writing hour, and rank-based work exemptions were suspended until the investigation ended. He ordered them processed by behavior, not by rank. The German colonel shouted that captured officers could not be treated like common laborers. Patton ordered the Geneva Rules book brought out, then had the interpreter read the sections on lawful work, discipline, and camp authority. He made the colonel listen while standing beside the shovel he had thrown down. The consequence became public when the willing German officers were loaded first, under the command of the black sergeant, and driven to the rail siding without incident. The trucks moved safely because the soldiers had found the sabotage before it could kill anyone. By afternoon, the refusal had cost the colonel his influence, the commander his authority, and the conspirators their privileges. The men they tried to humiliate had kept the detail moving, protected the prisoners, exposed the sabotage, and turned the insult into the beginning of a formal investigation. The major reversal began at the rail siding, where the willing German officers worked under Black American supervision and discovered something the conspirators had not expected. Beneath a collapsed signal shed, they found a locked metal dispatch box buried under broken boards. The black corporal who had repaired the truck line opened the box with an engineer's tool. Inside were ration coupons, civilian passes, and a packet of letters addressed to the German colonel. The letters showed that local sympathizers had been feeding information back into the camp through work details. A willing German major identified the handwriting on 2 letters as the colonel's aide. He said the officer had bragged that the refusal would prove black troops were unfit for authority and force the Americans to change guard assignments. The reversal moved quickly when the rail siding team radioed the discovery back to camp. Patton ordered the refusing officers brought to the work site under guard, not to work, but to face the evidence where their plan had been meant to succeed. When the German colonel arrived, he saw black soldiers standing in control of the site, willing German officers working safely, and his hidden correspondence spread across a crate. The scene he expected to humiliate the Americans had become the place where his outside contact was exposed. A civilian photographer was stopped near the rail fence with a camera and a folded note in his coat. The note told him to wait for the officer protest and photograph the moment when black guards were unable to move the German line. MPs seized the camera before a single staged image could be taken. Patton ordered the undeveloped film protected and the photographer questioned by military police. The man admitted he had been told a dramatic confrontation would happen at the camp gate and that the images could be sold as proof of American disorder. The black sergeant then found the strongest reversal. Inside the dispatch box was a prisoner transfer request naming Weber and 3 other German witnesses as men who should be moved away from the camp immediately. The request had been signed by the same American commander Patton had relieved that morning. The former camp commander was brought to the rail siding. He claimed he signed the request to prevent internal conflict, but Patton placed the sabotage wrench, the staged complaint, the photographer's note, and the transfer request in one row. The pattern showed protection for the organizers and removal for the witnesses. The German colonel tried to separate himself from the American commander, but the letters tied them through the same work detail channel. The colonel had counted on American embarrassment, outside pressure, and weak command to force a concession. The reversal became visible when Patton ordered the black sergeant to supervise the evidence inventory. The sergeant numbered each document, tagged each object, and signed the record as the officer in charge of the scene. Every German officer who had refused his authority watched his signature become part of the case. By sunset, the insult had reversed completely. The men accused of being unfit to command had uncovered the sabotage, secured the work site, protected witnesses, stopped the photographer, and exposed the hidden channel that connected the German officers to civilians and a compromised American commander. The final irreversible event began after dark, when MPs searched the former commander's quarters and found a locked drawer containing copies of transfer approvals, private complaints from German officers, and a schedule of future work details arranged to keep black troops away from certain prisoner groups. Patton ordered the drawer carried into the yard without removing the papers from it. Under floodlights, the lock was broken in public, and the contents were photographed before anyone touched them. The documents showed that the refusal at the gate was not the first concession. It was the boldest one. One file showed that 2 previous German objections had quietly changed guard assignments. Another showed that Weber had requested protection weeks earlier after hearing threats against prisoners willing to cooperate with American units. His request had been marked delayed and left unanswered. The black sergeant was asked to identify the signature on the guard reassignment forms. He pointed to the former commander's name, then to 2 officers who had repeatedly removed his unit from prisoner details without explanation. Those officers were placed under immediate restriction. The German colonel made one final attempt to reclaim authority. He demanded that German officer rank be respected and that no prisoner of his standing be placed under black supervision. Patton ordered the interpreter to record the demand exactly, then had it attached to the sabotage file. The final prisoner labor order was drafted before midnight. It stated that no German prisoner could refuse lawful work based on the race of American personnel, that any organized refusal would be treated as a disciplinary offense, and that all work details would be assigned by American command alone. Patton then ordered the German colonel and the principal conspirators reassigned to separate barracks, away from the officers they had threatened. Their rank would be recorded, but their power over other prisoners was ended. They would not command the line, choose trucks, or control witness movement again. A new detail was formed at dawn with regular German prisoners, willing officers, and the same black American escort unit. This time the men loaded without protest. The colonel watched from behind a separate fence as the trucks rolled past him under the command of the sergeant he had tried to humiliate. The final evidence came from the photographer's developed film. The first frames showed the empty rail fence where he had waited for the staged confrontation. The next frames showed MPs arresting him instead. The image meant to embarrass black soldiers became proof that the German officers had tried to manufacture a scene. Patton ordered copies of the labor order posted at the camp gate, the barracks doors, the work shed, and the command office. He also ordered Weber and the other witnesses placed under direct protection so they could not be transferred quietly or punished by prisoner leaders. The former commander was removed in a staff car before breakfast, while the German colonel was processed for disciplinary segregation. The black sergeant remained on the loading road, checking names and tools with the same steady voice he had used during the insult. The final irreversible act came when Patton signed the permanent command order stripping German officers of any say over which American soldiers supervised them. From that moment, refusal could no longer hide behind rank, custom, or prejudice. The camp would move by American orders, and every man in the yard had seen who kept those orders when the test came. The next morning, the work trucks left under clear light with black soldiers in charge of the road and German prisoners seated in silence behind them. Weber watched from the medical bench as the colonel was marched towards separate housing with no followers beside him. Patton did not give a speech. He only pinned the new order to the gate, where every prisoner could read that American authority would not bend because captured officers disliked the men wearing its uniform. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WWII stories.